The Question by Tom Palmer. 1. Naomi and Layla sat in silence, like the rest of their Year 7 tutor group, staring at the front of the classroom. There was a man on the screen. He was old, very old. His hair was white and his eyes looked tired, but his voice was clear and calm. "We were forced from the cattle trucks," he said slowly, "and made to stand on a long railway platform. Then soldiers came to put us in different queues. My father and I were sent into the same queue. My mother and 2 younger sisters were put into another, and that was the last time I saw them. The place we'd arrived at was called Auschwitz." Naomi watched the man's face as he spoke. His eyes never left the camera as he was recording his testimony. His name was Yossi Frenkel. He was a Holocaust survivor. When the short video finished, nobody spoke. Miss Memmi, Naomi's history teacher, coughed and rubbed her mouth and glanced at the floor. "As we now know," she said at last, "Mr. Frenkel survived the concentration camps, and in May 1945 he was liberated by the Russians. Later that summer, he came to live in the UK. He was a refugee. 81 members of his family had been murdered by the Nazis. His mother, his sisters, his father, everyone." Miss Memmi stared out of the window at the cold, wintry sports field, the dusting of snow. "So, who knows what day it is today?" she asked. Cian Scott's hand went up first. "Yes, Cian. Holocaust Memorial Day, miss." "Correct," the teacher smiled. "And we are very lucky that Mr. Frenkel is coming to speak to us in school today in person." Another silence in the room. Naomi looked at the other Year 7s who seemed transfixed by the frozen image of Yossi Frenkel on the screen. He really was coming here. They were going to be able to see a Holocaust survivor in person, talk to him. It was hard to believe. "Okay, so for the rest of the lesson, before we go and meet Mr. Frenkel, we need to spend some time thinking about the questions we would like to ask him," the teacher said. Now there was noise, 30 voices chattering. Naomi overheard the words striped pyjamas, gas chambers, and Hitler above the racket, but she remained silent. She already knew what her question was. She had had it in her head ever since they'd had the letter home to say that a Holocaust survivor was coming into school. But, however much she wanted to ask a question, she wasn't sure she would be able to. How do you ask a Holocaust survivor a question? Miss Memmi let the conversations go on, then glancing at the clock above the whiteboard, she held up her hand. Slowly at first, then more rapidly, children in the classroom raised their hands too, and the room became quiet. "Great, thank you," Miss Memmi began. "Now, who has a question they would like to ask Mr. Frenkel?" Naomi didn't put her hand up. Eunice Khan did. "How about what did it feel like to be in a concentration camp?" he suggested. Miss Memmi nodded. "You could ask that," she hesitated. At that moment, Naomi identified something in her teacher, something unexpected. Miss Memmi was just as nervous about what they should ask Yossi Frenkel about as she was. It was funny, sort of. Teachers were meant to know everything and be in control all the time, but not today. "Any more ideas for questions?" Miss Memmi asked. Naomi still didn't put her hand up, but Gavin Barnes did. "I've got a question I'm going to ask him," he announced. Miss Memmi frowned. The whole class braced themselves. Gavin Barnes could be difficult. That was the word the head of year, Mrs. Halifax, had used when he was suspended for a week after blocking all the plug holes in the girls' toilets, leaving the taps on and flooding the whole ground floor. "I hope it's a sensible question," the teacher said. "You'll have to wait and see," Gavin grinned. Naomi and Layla shared a glance. "Let's hope he doesn't get picked," Layla said. Naomi nodded. Half an hour later, the Year 7s were on their feet, moving towards the hall to meet Yossi Frenkel, past the Holocaust Memorial Day display that had been on the wall since they'd begun at school 4 months ago. Layla walked alongside Naomi, and Naomi was glad of it. Since they had met in September, they had become good friends, best friends. They knew everything about each other. Secondary school would have been a lot tougher for Naomi without Layla. So what is your question for Yossi? Layla asked. How did you know I had one? I can tell, and I think it's good. I never dare ask a question in assembly. The two friends laughed until they saw Mrs. Halifax standing at the entrance to the hall, putting her finger to her lips. Now silence fell, and Naomi could feel her heart hammering hard. So hard she felt sick. She was nervous, whether she was going to ask her question or not. A lot of them were nervous. This was no ordinary assembly. They walked in single file and in silence up to the main hall, up the raked seating, turning to sit and look down to the front where an old man was sitting with their head teacher, Mrs. Sedber. The man was taking a drink from a glass of water, and his hand trembled slightly as he did so. He looked older than he did on the film, thinner too. But there was no doubt the man smiling back at them was Yossi Frenkel, the Holocaust survivor. And that's the end of chapter 1.